This is the District 2 Sports Podcast with your hosts, Gregory, Devin, and Big G, your voice for local sports in Southern Virginia. You can listen to this episode and hundreds of others on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Give us a like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
They're not in my top 12. They're not in my top 12. I told y'all. They're not.
Big G got his teams in and they all lost last week. So,
how did you get that? I got two teams in and one of them lost.
I need to throw one more shout out. I got a shout out to my little guy over there on the left, little Dev.
The spreadsheet is back out, and it's back.
Oh, you have one for basketball?
I got one for basketball.
Yes.
Really? You're not for Spurs? Okay. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Whoa,
So now
man,
we're going hot now. It's going hot.
For anybody listening tonight, anybody paying attention, if y'all don't know, the mob is in the NFL.
Not a fan? Not a fan of the lo-fi?
That music was atrocious.
That was weak. I did not.
That was the first thing I wrote down. As soon as it started, I put, not crazy about this.
All right, so District 2 Sports Podcast, and we're back with another episode today. And today we're joined by the new head coach of the men's basketball program there at Mary Baldwin University, Coach Nate Smith. Coach, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing today? Thanks for having me on.
Well, we thank you for your time. We got some dogs already in the background. But no, we just want to talk to you about your transition to Mary Baldwin as the new head coach there. I know you're currently going through the process of getting from Ohio to the Stanton area. How's that transition been for you so far?
Yeah, it's been really good. Obviously logging a lot of hours in the car, going back and forth between Cleveland, Ohio to Stanton, Virginia, trying to look for a place and everything like that. We were able to kind of finalize our living situation this past weekend, and now we're in the process of selling our house out here too. But it's been really good. I think the transition's been, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but it's been great. I think just getting to know the people at Mary Baldwin University, and also I think being able to, talk to the people at Oberlin too, to say my goodbyes. I was at graduation the other day, talking with the team, talking with our athletic director, our head coach there, and everything like that. Everybody's been so helpful in this process. Like, I feel, in a lot of ways really fortunate, that that I'm going through this and have kind of built up the relationships that I do, and they've been great with me.
Coach, when you have a position like that and you're going from Oberlin, or you're still kind of over in Oberlin, how much do you have to rely on your assistant coaches, in Stanton area to kind of, whether it's recruiting or just kind of keep the guys going and, kind of giving you the feedback that you need?
Yeah. You know what? I think one of the things that I was really fortunate with is that we have a great assistant coach at Mary Baldwin who also works in our admissions department. Tevin Brown has just been awesome. He's been here since the start of the program. He's won a championship with this program. And I think his relationship, with the players, and then also just helping me through hey, this is how this admissions process works. This is how this school operates with, these things, has been really, really helpful. Cause, I think when, the thing that people don't know, when you take a job, there's background checks and there's things that you have to do. And, it's you get offered a job, you accept it, and you want to hit the ground running. And it's not really like that. There's this, this process where you can't talk to the players at all. And especially in today's college basketball, I'm actually, as the new head coach, can kind of be behind the eight ball in some respects, because everybody hits the portal and every other coaching staff can talk to the guys, the Mary Baldwin players, but I can't. And so there is a little bit of a time gap there before background checks clear and things like that, where you can't talk to the players. And so to have an assistant coach with the experience that Tevin has, it has been great for me in my transition to Mary Baldwin. He's a phenomenal coach. He's a phenomenal person, and so I think in terms of the appeal, for this job in particular, he's a big part of that, and I told him right when I got the job too, like, this is a partnership. We're going to be a team, I really, really value him, and I'm very fortunate to have him be a part of our squad.
Coach Gregory, am I off mute now? Okay, just making sure. Hey, Coach.
Your dogs were getting after it. So
Yeah, they were.
the host the czar had to
He had
put
to
you on
step
mute.
in. Yeah, he cut me off there. I had to make sure. Of all the dogs, I thought it would be somebody else, but anyway, mine just goes berserk. Anyway, let's just. There he goes again. So here you are. This? I guess the bottom line is why Mary Baldwin? Why Stanton, Virginia? I mean, here you are in the backyard of Cleveland, Ohio. You come from Sacramento, California. Why Mary Baldwin?
I think that, I felt like it was time in my career to be a head coach. It's been a goal of mine for my whole life to lead a college program. And, we can talk about a little bit about my history, but what I found, especially a couple years ago, is that I really wanted to be a small college head coach. That's what I really am passionate about and really want to do with my life. I love coaching basketball. I just love basketball so much. And I wanted to be a small college head coach. I had the opportunity to be the associate head coach at Oberlin, and Coach Shiva Senthil has been so great in kind of like preparing me and really viewed me as a co-head coach there. And so I felt like I was ready to lead my own program. Over these past couple of years, I've had some opportunities. I've had a head coaching opportunity that I turned down because it wasn't the right fit, and I think a part of that is I think for me, it's real simple. It's like place that you want to live in, right? And that includes myself and my wife and my daughter. So, if they're not on board on where they want to live, I'm not going. And then I think opportunity to win, opportunity to compete and win in a place that you want to live in. And I think that's really simple. And I think when I went through this process with Tom Burns and Christy Shelton, who's the athletic director and associate athletic director, I think that, I think I was in lockstep with their vision for this program. I think when we went out to campus, really loved the people on campus, loved how the university and the downtown Stanton area are really intertwined. They're it's basically in downtown Stanton, and downtown Stanton's a lot of fun, great restaurants, great people, really walkable. The schools, the elementary schools for my daughter are great. And so, that, in terms of where we wanted to live, where my wife wanted to live, I think our family as a whole, just decided hey, this is a place that I think that we would really enjoy, in the Shenandoah Valley, exploring a new area, it's a little bit of an adventure, right? It's a little bit of an adventure for our family and a little bit of a different area. But at the same time, we felt like it checked off a lot of boxes and we were really excited about this opportunity.
Coach, how much familiarity with, I know that usually Virginia's USA South, ODAC, I think there's a Capital team in there as well. How much familiarity did you have with those conferences or just the state of Virginia basketball in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm learning, I'm smart enough to know what I don't know, in some ways. But, I think what's been great is these past 4 years at Oberlin, I've become a Division III basketball junkie, when we're, whether we were preparing or playing or, and things like that, or if we didn't have a game or we were coming back from a game, 5-hour bus ride back from Wabash, myself and Coach Shiva, we'd just be watching Division III basketball. When I was at Division I, you'd be watching Duke and North Carolina, and you'd be watching those schools and on the bus rides and stuff like that. When we were at Oberlin, you just kind of, I almost stopped watching Division I until the tournament, and I've been watching Division III basketball, and Virginia itself just has such a rich basketball tradition. The ODAC is a really, really good conference. I know that you guys have mentioned it before. It's kind of like the SEC of Division III basketball or Division III sports. We felt like the NCAC where we competed in Oberlin is kind of like the Big Ten, in a lot of ways. And so I loved watching those teams compete and play and getting a feel for, what what coaches do. I think like one of the coolest parts about Division III too is that I think the coaching in Division III basketball is phenomenal. It's so good. And you see like a lot of guys, a lot of Division III coaches get poached to go to higher levels because they're so talented. But I think there's some really, really good coaches. There's some really good coaches in the USA South. And I think that, so I do have some familiarity. And actually, like, funny enough, when Mary Baldwin made the tournament a few years back, they played in Cleveland. I mean, I was at that game. I never, obviously it's a small world, right? And, you never know what's going to happen. But they played Case Western in the first round of the tournament. And my head coach, Shiva Senthil, played for Todd McGinnis, who's at Case Western. And, Shiva was like, hey, you want to go to Todd's game and check it out? They're playing Mary Baldwin, and so I didn't know much about it. And, Mary Baldwin at the time, but I actually watched him play in the tournament. I watched him play Case Western. So it was kind of funny when this job came about and I'd actually like seen him play live. But, I think like, I've gained a lot of familiarity, just kind of like, being a student of the game, student of Division III basketball, and have nothing but the utmost respect for, these programs that are in Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, and the coaches as well. So really, really excited about the opportunity.
Coach, have you had a chance to sit down with your players yet and have that meeting with them and let them know what you're expecting, or, are they all in? Do they need to go elsewhere? What have you? And then the other thing I was going to mention was Stanton is an absolutely beautiful place. I was just up there a couple of weeks ago, especially during the fall when the leaves are changing. And I also wanted to, I think I'm pronouncing this right, Masaki on Richmond Road. Very good Japanese restaurant. Very good.
There we go. Now you're speaking my language. You give me all the food recommendations that you want. Okay. I'm excited. I'm excited about that. I'm going to be checking off all of them. I was at Fire Street Bistro last weekend. It was really, really good. We went, they shut down one of their streets in downtown and actually have they put all the restaurants put their tables out in the middle of the street. It's just a pedestrian walkway, and there's no cars or anything like that. So they have a lot of outside dining. It's been awesome. So we're checking them off the list, and myself and my wife will be really excited to hear that there's a good Japanese restaurant in town too. So pretty fired up about that. To your question about, so the first thing that I did was wore out my phone. I had to, as soon as I was able to, I called every single person that was on the team, from last year. And that's, not only the guys that were in the portal, the guys who were coming back. I've tried to reach out and call, guys that were graduating and alums, and, try to, really get a real feel for, first of all, their experience at Mary Baldwin, from a basketball perspective and a school perspective as well. So, I think trying to learn from their experiences is a big part of it. And then, there's a way, trying to rebuild the roster, right? Finding, who's in and who's out. There were, I think there was a guy or two there was two kids that graduated, and then there was a guy a kid that transferred before I got to talk to him. Actually, two kids two or three kids that transferred before I got a chance to speak with them, and so, wished, and I ended up talking to them and wishing them the best of luck. And that's totally fine. And then there were about 5 others that I talked to that are going to return. And so, really excited about that. Was able to retain a lot of the roster, guys that were thinking about going into the portal, guys that were in the portal that decided to come back. And then through that have been able to add to that as well, with a recruiting class as well. So that has been a lot of phone calls. I probably, when I'm not listening to, not listening to podcasts on my trips to my 6-hour trips to Virginia, I'm probably on the phone talking, and then was able to go down. And once everything was cleared and I was the head coach, I've been able to come down to Stanton a couple of times. And what was really nice is that, this is a situation where I was able to get hired before school was out. And so was able to sit down face to face with not only our athletic director again and people on campus, whether it's people in the career center or, professors or, things like that, but also just get to sit down with every single person that is a part of our Mary Baldwin basketball team, and I think that was a big part of it for me is like, as soon as I was able to, I wanted to drive down and meet people face to face. And so I was able to have some really productive conversations with a lot of our current players and have kind of, built the roster that way. So there's some really excited for the guys that are coming back. Really, really excited about it because I think it starts with them. And then I think it was my job to kind of hit the road a little bit and find some guys out there that wanted to be a part of this thing too, that, help supplement our roster. So for us, I think Marquise Dunklin, DJ, Jamal Ukebu, guys like that are, returners that I'm really, really excited about coming back, but I'm very appreciative of all the guys that have put their trust in me to come back and really excited about the roster that we've put together.
Coach, let me ask you, I know you might have to, just due to circumstances just coming in and stuff, might have to, not necessarily hastily put something together, but, you might have to find some alternatives to putting a roster together and putting a decent roster together besides your starters is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
There's a program right up the road who we talked to, I guess probably about a year or so ago, who made no bones about it. He's looking for older kids to play, not necessarily saying he wouldn't take a high school senior at all, but he wants the older group to come in and play. And I guess that could somewhat, physically and mentally give them a little bit of an advantage on the court. My question to you is, how important going forward, maybe after this year, how important is that high school senior going to be to you?
It's very important. To be honest with you, I think everybody does it differently, and I don't, everyone's got a different viewpoint on how they want to build their roster and how they want to coach. One of the things that I really enjoy about coaching is development. And so, I think that, and I think that the high school senior is kind of like a forgotten about commodity in a lot of ways. I think that they've gotten a bad, they've gone through some struggles, I think, these past few years with, transfer portal and some things like that. Even junior college players, I think, have had, some struggles as well. And so I think that might be like an undervalued area, and I think myself as a coach, I think that, I've got to be open to some areas in recruiting of where there's undervalued talent, and I think at the high school level, there's a ton of undervalued talent. And I think that, one of the things that I'm passionate about in coaching that I really love about coaching is developing players, developing not only players, but developing people. And so, I've kind of have a player development program that I've refined over the years that I think that was very productive in my years at Sacramento State. We were a low major Division I program that produced, 20 professional players, even at Oberlin, we've got, we've had guys that didn't have any offers that were high school kids. They didn't have any offers out of high school except for us. And now I'll be through my 4 years, we'll have 6 guys on professional teams, and I think that just speaks to hey, this development thing that we're doing, it works, and especially the more time that you have to put invest in a kid, so if he comes in as he's a high school senior that is a freshman, that's more time that I get with him to be able to develop him. And I think I've got a pretty good track record with that development, that if you work your butt off, and you kind of trust the process, it's going to be productive for you. So yeah, it's a long-winded to say I'm looking for high school kids. I want to get them in here. I want to be able to work with them. I want to be able to get that time with them. I think that's the best part of being a coach. I don't begrudge anybody, and we'll have to look at some older guys too. I'm sure, to be able to supplement the roster and be able to compete and win. But really, you want to build it with some high school guys that you can develop and build a relationship. And that's the funnest part, is I get to know these kids over a 3 to 4 year process. I get to know their families. That's the best part of this. the guys, we had 7 guys graduate at Oberlin just last week, and all 7 were here all for their whole time, all like 4 years, and so like, it's really cool to like the relationships that you build with those kids, and you get to build with their families, and you get to know them, and those are guys that I'll know for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that only happens because you get that investment of time together.
Coach, piggybacking off my own question, I guess you want to say, you've been at D1 Sacramento State. You're now, you've been to Oberlin. Now you're back at Mary Baldwin. So my biggest question is, and we were fortunate enough to cover the ODAC tournament this year, or
Yeah.
interviews and do some AI stuff and do some whatever. And it was very, we were very fortunate. But we, in the last two seasons alone, we've seen 6 tournament games, probably that came down to the last 30 seconds or overtime. And I just wanted to know from you, like I said, with your Division I background, what's the biggest misnomer about D3 basketball?
I think that people try to diminish D3 basketball from like a talent perspective, first of all, right? And they couldn't be further from the truth. Like, the ODAC is an incredible conference. The NCAC, where I came from at Oberlin, is an incredible conference. I coached a Division I. There's plenty of players in both the ODAC and the NCAC that can play Division I basketball. I was there. I know it, right? Like, they could have played and played Division I. What they're looking for is a little bit of a different college experience, right? And maybe a little bit of a different, maybe more of an opportunity, too. So Division III basketball, it's never been better than it is today. Like, I think Division III basketball 10, 15 years ago is way different than it is today from a talent perspective. It is really, really good college basketball. And there are players that can play. There's players that can play at the Division II level, that can play at the Division I level. Shoot, there's a school in our conference in the NCAC, Worcester. They won a bunch of national titles. Worcester and Wittenberg, won a bunch of national titles. They went out to Hawaii, played in a Division II tournament, and won. They won the tournament. There's teams, and there's teams in the ODAC that that'll play. They'll play Division IIs, they'll play Division Ones. They can compete and win with those teams. So it's. I think what people don't understand is that playing college basketball is a privilege. Playing Division III college basketball is an absolute privilege, and it is really, really good ball. Teams can beat, teams in Division III can beat teams that are at a quote unquote higher level. Players that play in Division III can play it at a higher level, as well. And I think I also think another misnomer is, it's like, oh, well, there's no scholarships in Division III, which is, athletic scholarships, which is technically true. But look, like, time and time again, there's at the Division III level, like, you can get a package at a Division III school that's less money than your Division II scholarship. You know what I mean? So like, there's plenty of scenarios where, a kid's like, oh, well, coach, like I've got a D2 scholarship and everything like that. Well, it's like, well, that partial D2 scholarship, like, how much are you still paying? Because you can get a better price at some of these D3 schools, depending on, your family's financial situation or certain scholarships that you can acquire, at the D3 level. So like, even from a cost perspective, I think what people don't understand is that it can be more affordable at the D3 level. You just have to, it's just a little bit different,
But I want to ask you, to go back to the recruiting ties. I mean, you're a West Coast guy there at Sac State. You've been in Ohio as well. How much do you rely on those previous relationships with, either high school coaches or just AAU or whatever it might be, kind of bring some kids in there at Mary Baldwin as well?
Yeah. So, I think you got to take them from, I think you got to find the right guys from wherever they're from. So, I've got some relationships with some guys out in California and was able to get a really, really good high school player from La Jolla Country Day in Southern California to come and commit to Mary Baldwin. I'm really excited about him. I think that he's going to be a really, really good player. There's a junior college player from Antelope Valley in California that's going to come play for me. And it's funny, like, some of these like full circle moments. The first guy that I signed, kind of like I was the lead on in terms of recruiting when I was at Sacramento State was a kid named Osi Nwachuku from Antelope Valley College, and became a really, really good, productive player for us. And here we go again. I get the head coaching job. I end up talking with the head coach who's still he's the same coach that coached OC when I was at Sac State. He's been there for forever, and reached out to him, and I was like, hey, do you have any guys that, you know me, you know how I coach, you know how I develop players, you know how I was with OC. Is there any guys that, that you have on your roster that would be like a really, really good fit? And he was like, I absolutely do. And so we ended up getting a kid from Antelope Valley, as well. And so, yeah, and a lot of the stuff is relationships, and so, I guess, this first year you lean on some of the relationships that you already have, whether it be from California or internationally or Ohio or wherever. And then one of the things I'm really excited about is to develop relationships with people from Virginia, North Carolina, and things like that. I think that stuff's like so super exciting. And I know that, you guys have like a foothold in here too, and you guys know local talent, and so I think it's been really fun getting to know you guys and talk to Gregory on the phone a few times, and I'm really excited about learning about this area a little bit. I know a little bit, and but at the same time, like, I'm excited to get to know the coaches and the people out here and the players and all that stuff. So it's just really, really exciting. And I think, like, I don't ever want to like shut a door. I think that you got to be opportunistic and find guys, and as long as they're the right fits, and I think that's the biggest part for any kid out there. From their end, they're trying to find the right fit. Right? You talk to any kid, like, what are you looking for? I'm trying to find the right fit. Well, coaches are trying to find the right fit too. You know what I mean? Like, that's what we're trying to do too. We're trying to find the right fit, the right type of kid that's going to work and thrive, in our environment, and at our school, and so, yeah, I'm excited about the recruiting process. In general, I've been able to, lean on some of, at Oberlin, we were also a school that, we didn't have one kid from Ohio on our roster. We're a school that recruits nationally with the academic standards that we have at Oberlin. So, like, half our roster was from California. So that was, an easy transition for me. And then, to be able to bring some California kids out to Mary Baldwin, I'm excited to do that,
Coach,
show them that Japanese restaurant,
There you go. Exactly. Coach, here's where the part where Gregory probably he's going to ban me tomorrow. He's going to put the mute button on me tomorrow. So I had a totally different question I was going to ask you now, but since you mentioned all this stuff, I said I got to go back because, here's the part where I pitch District 2 sports. I mean, we put a Super 12 poll together for teams, and we put a Super 12 individual player, and then with the Player of the Year award kind of thing on our program. We recognize talent. And listen, I'm not here to put down any other programs as far as podcasts whatsoever. I will never do that. I don't want to talk about anybody, but we do recognize talent. And the thing that I've gotten really kind of disgusted with, and the reason why I am so thankful for programs like yourself and being able to come to you and talk to you, is that I really feel like, and we talked about the different levels a few moments ago, I feel like we've run into kids who are able to play that mid-major, that Division I, kind of style or play. And we cannot seem to find the people who will answer a call, answer a email on that level. And listen, I get it. I know people are busy. I get it. But when you introduce a talent like that, it just disturbs me that it doesn't go any further than that. And that's the reason why I kind of asked you a question about how important that high school senior is, because I'm just finding out right now that, I don't know, not necessarily that they're not that important, but very rarely do you hear, hey, I've got room on our, I've got one more spot left open. We're going to leave that for our high school seniors. So, just kind of throwing it out there just to see if it sticks.
Yeah, and I think I think like one of the things that I've learned too in my time in coaching is that like, you try to, it's good to try to get back to as many people as you possibly can, phone calls, emails, like we get a ton of them, but you never know, you never know what you're going to find in those areas and things like that. And I have a different perspective too, because like I was a kid that like when I was trying to get into coaching, like, I was a guy who was calling and emailing, was, I was that kid, and so, I think that you can find talent, from anywhere. And I do think and honestly, I feel bad for a lot of the high school seniors, and how they're being recruited just because I think that there's so many good kids out there that get overlooked because, I think programs, it's like basketball, like any sport or anything like that, is a little bit of like a copycat thing going on too. Like they want to recruit older and older guys. They think the transfer portal is like the only way to do it. But I think there's a lot of like high school talent out there that's really undervalued that just need a shot. They just need an opportunity, and I think like, it's our job as coaches to, to find guys out there that we think that we can develop. And, I'm excited about that and really appreciative of, I think like guys like yourself who try to amplify those people too, who try to, get their names out there and try to get them in front of coaches and try to help them with those opportunities,
Well, the other thing that I wanted to, say, and I don't know if it resonates at all. Maybe I'm the only one that kind of understands this, but when, especially a lot of these programs are building their roster, they're having to pay NIL money. They're having to pay for those players for that position. And if you find that high school senior that not necessarily in the top 300 or 500, in the country or whatever, it's very little money that has to go into that. So I just don't, it bothers me. I just put it that way. But at the same
Yeah.
time, we have gone 32 minutes and 45 seconds, coach, in this interview so far. And I think it's time to let the cat out of the bag. I wanted to let everybody know that I will be transferring to Mary Baldwin in the fall. So I've still got 4 years of eligibility left to play basketball from Averett College back in the day. So I'll be transferring.
There we go. I think, what are we dealing with here? I got to see, I need to see a highlight film. Now, if you were going to put a highlight film together, what kind of music are you putting in the background of that highlight film? That's the important question. And what am I seeing? Am I seeing some Princeton Center? What do we got?
Well, it's probably going to be, I know you always got room for a stretch 6 foot and 225. I know you always got that guy. I mean, I can bully somebody. I don't know necessarily down low. I push these little kids of mine around all the time, so you know how that goes.
Yeah. So what's the on your highlight package? What band are we playing? What song are we playing in the highlight package? A lot of Drake these days. You get a lot of Drake.
I'm heavy metal. I'm probably going Soil or some Metallica or something like that, because I'm gonna lower the shoulder down and I'm gonna back up with little Karl Malone post up jumper. So kind of something like that. So
that's
I
right.
guess
That's right.
You're old enough to know Karl Malone, right?
That's right. I sure am. I sure am. Yeah.
But
yeah. So no, I know. Like you'll put some bruises on some guys.
Absolutely, I don't mind doing that either. So no, but tell me something. I got a 6'6". Just found out last night I had a 6'6" kid that is averaging 22 points and 12 rebounds. How does Nate Smith sell him on coming to Mary Baldwin?
I think like I was talking about before, I think it's fit. And I think like fit in totality here. Like, so you got to think about it from like the academic part, right? So, is it a kid that would love like Stanton as a town and the school of Mary Baldwin? Like, is it, and one of the strengths of the school is like, look, we're a small private liberal arts college or a university now, but that you have small class sizes. So you get that individual attention, right? So from an academic standpoint, like there's certain kids that really thrive in those environments, are they one of those kids, right? I think that it's the area that you live in, right? Stanton's a wonderful town in the Shenandoah Valley. There's tons of it's a beautiful, beautiful area. And I think that there's not a lot of colleges and universities that are right in a downtown area in a 30,000, people city, And so is that an environment that they would thrive in, right? And then the fun part is the basketball part, right? Are they someone that is going to thrive within our culture and how we go about things day to day? We connect as people. And then, I think like from the basketball part, like, what kind of style I think suits their game as it fit our game, and I think we can kind of talk about this a little bit too, is that like, I'm a coach that is going to play through a ton of ball screens. I want 5 guys on the floor that are willing to be decision makers. I think like everybody, I run a ball screen offense, and I think that, what I try to do is get high IQ basketball players, and I try to teach them how to play instead of run plays. Is that a type of basketball that your son is going to thrive in? Right. And I think like, from that standpoint, like, and people kind of talk about point guard, shooting guard, you're talking about a 6'6" player. I always think about it like when whoever's got the ball in their hands, like they're the point guard. Right. So like, that's how I think about basketball. Like, I don't think about it positionally like that. Like, I think about it more in terms of like, hey, like if we come off of this ball screen and they're in they try to drop coverage us and we hit the pocket, whoever's rolling into that pocket and has the ball in their hands, now they're the point guard. They're the decision maker. We need our guy who's rolling into the pocket to be a good decision maker too. And sometimes that decision's to score, and sometimes that decision's to read coverages. So, I think, is that something that is that a type of basketball that fits their game, and stuff like that. And, then, is there like the intangible piece and toughness piece? And, I think like, I think coming from a guy like you, I'm assuming that they're going to be tough. They're going to do the dirty work, right? And that they're going to have all those intangible pieces, and I believe that they would, when you were describing your game, if the apple didn't fall too far from the tree, I think they're going to thrive in our system.
Well, Coach, I just wanted to say, I mean, my highlight tape, I'm putting NBA YoungBoy all over it. That's what
There
the
we
kids
go.
are all listening to now. So I'm going to be a dog. 5'10" on a good day, but 6'1" in the program. I mean, I think I'll fit in pretty well with the offense and everything. But I wanted to ask. So going back to the development side of things, and obviously you kind of hit on some stuff, just now. But when it comes to taking in guys or coaching guys who are less highly touted at the D3 level and at Sac State, which is a mid-major, I mean, what is the key to getting the most out of those guys? What is the secret sauce for turning these guys into overachievers?
Yeah, I think like first you gotta like everybody's gonna talk about like the hard work and stuff like that, and that's true. It really is, but like sometimes the harder you work, the luckier you get, right? Like, so there is a hard work element, but that hard work only comes if you love it, right? Like, and I think like that more than like the hard work. Like the hard work is something that happens when you love something, right? So like I get to coach basketball. Like everybody wants to talk about basketball coaches are like, oh, I'm grinding, I'm doing all this stuff. It's such a grind. It's like, it's not a grind. We're coaching basketball. Like, I love basketball. Like, this is the best. Like, my dad worked at UPS. Like, my mom, ran blood drives for the Red Cross. Like, they were grinding. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I get to coach basketball. Like, it's not a grind. Like, I love it, And so what you're trying to do is I want to have players that love it, right? If you love basketball, then you're going to work at it. That's like, it's pretty simple. So like, that's the biggest part. And then, it's finding, I think that there's certain parts of the game that I think that have been maybe under taught in some ways. And you want to like, and so like, I think like, whether it's like 2-foot finishing or and being able to like finish in the paint through contact, I think that contact for me is a big one, right? Like football's a collision sport, but basketball's a contact sport. You know what I mean? Like it's a contact sport. So like you're not getting, if you could be an All-American versus a chair, and that doesn't mean anything, like, in college basketball. So like, I think like being able to develop guys who can understand like, hi, this is, 2-foot finishing. I can understand how to like, how my body reacts to contact, how I can like, how I can finish around the rim. What are my paint finishes? These are the footwork things that I need to do to get better. Defensively, it's like, here's some things that I can do to be more laterally quick, so I can show my hands and get in front of my defender or get in front of my offender. I think there's like some things like that we do from a development standpoint that I think have been tried and true and really, really worked and have worked over the years. And I'm excited to implement a lot of those things. But like, it really comes like the first thing that you're looking for is, do they love the game? Because like all that stuff will all be a byproduct, all the 2-foot finishing, stride stop, or lateral quickness and, ball screen reads and all that stuff is going to be a byproduct of a kid that like loves the game, because if he loves the game, then he's going to work at the game.
Coach, scouting report on these two, they don't make their free throws in high pressure situations. I saw it in Salem during the ODAC tournament. They couldn't hit any free throws in the court.
Are you kidding me?
Who won the free throw contest? I did. Anyways, Coach, getting to the hard work portion you're just talking about just now and loving basketball. I mean, you've kind of done a little bit of everything in your time as a team manager, director of basketball operations, assistant coach, even associate head coach. How have each of those positions kind of influenced you as a coach now, and then will influence you as the head coach there at Mary Baldwin?
Yeah, so like I got my start, I kind of come to this a little bit differently than a lot of other coaches. I didn't have like a decorated playing career. I was recruited at the Division III level, some Division IIs, some junior colleges. I got hurt. I kind of got out of basketball for a little bit. Had worked some, was going to school, working some odd jobs, and I was, when I got started at Sacramento State, basically what I did was I was in Sacramento and I went around to like every program, every college program, junior college, even some high schools and stuff like that. And was just like, hey, like wanted to get advice on how to get into coaching. I really, after my playing career was done, right? And I wanted to I missed the competition. I missed basketball. I really missed it. And I was like, I really want to get into coaching, and actually had a junior college coach, gave me some great advice. He told me, he's like, hey, you could come on staff here, but he's like, really, you should find the level that you want to work at and volunteer. And he's like, just get your foot in the door at the level that you want to work at. So if you want to be, he's like, I could pay you as junior college assistant, or if Division I's what you really want to do, like the best way to progress in your career is just to go volunteer to Division I, and get to know those guys and work your butt off. And it was honestly like some of the best advice I've ever gotten in my entire life. I ended up enrolling at Sacramento State. I went down the hall to Coach Katz's office, introduced myself, and he immediately brushed me off, as some head coaches do to guys who are trying to come into their office and they have no idea who they are, as he rightfully should have done. But I was really grateful. He pawned me off to one of the assistants, AJ Riding, who's actually one of my best friends to this day. And AJ sat me down and was like, he kind of was like, hey, look, if you want to be a volunteer for this program, we've got practice tomorrow at 4:45 a.m. I'd show up at 4:15 and be ready to go. And so that's what I did. And I was going to school at Sacramento State. I was bartending at night to make a little bit of money. And then I would go and I would show up at summer practices at 4:15 in the morning, and I would sweep the floors and I would run the clocks and I would move the camera back and forth, and do stuff like that. And really by showing up and And doing those things, like you kind of get recognized, and then they kind of, they started giving me jobs, and they gave me, I became kind of like the video coordinator. And then you basically, you're like, hey, like, all right, well, now I need to master this, right? Like I got this job. Now I need to be the best video coordinator there ever was, right? And so you do that, and all the while, like, you try to find other ways to be valuable, and so I took on other responsibilities, like stuff that, we always called it like ditches, right? Like the jobs that nobody else wanted to do. I just got really good at digging ditches, like, and got really good at doing all the jobs that nobody else wanted to do. And really, like, you're being kind by calling Sacramento State a mid-major. We're a low major. You know what I mean? Like there's we played in like a high school gym, in Sacramento, and we were kind of low major Division I, but there's opportunity there, right? Like we didn't have big support staffs. Like it was Coach Katz and 3 assistants and a director of ops and me, and through that, like, you just kind of find ways to make yourself valuable. Then, through that, they promoted me to director of operations, and it was the same thing again. Like, it was like, all right, well, now I got to learn how to run a golf tournament and do alumni relations, and I got to, team meals and budgets and like all that stuff. But all the time also kind of thinking about, like, how do I become a better basketball coach? Well, they let me in, like, I get to be in every practice. Like, you know what I mean? I get to do the stats. I get to, like, by the end of the time, you could start to like be in drills and, and do stuff like that. Like, all you couldn't, at the time, like the only thing that you couldn't do was recruit off campus. But I could run visits, you know what I mean? I could call people on the phone. I could, like, so it was like I did director of ops, which was great because I got to learn how to run a budget and a golf tournament and run camps and do all that stuff, which is an important part of running a program. You need all that stuff. But then I also got to like learn the basketball side of it too, I think through that, like, find ways to make yourself valuable. I was able to, one of the things that we had an offensive coordinator, we had a defensive coordinator, but we never did it. We never had anybody who did anything with rebounding. So like, I was like, well, this is a way I could make myself valuable. So like I studied, different guys that were doing different stuff from a rebounding perspective in Europe and Australia. I'm a basketball nerd when it comes to stats and things like that. And I created my own rebounding system. And look, like, sometimes you do stuff like that and you put it on the coach's desk and it goes right in the waste bin, and you just got to be persistent, but I was able to do that, and Coach Katz and Coach Laird, I think they really liked what I was doing from the rebounding perspective. And we went from a team that they started to utilize some of the things that I was trying to do. And we went from a team that was, basically the same roster size wise, from one of the worst rebounding teams in the league to one of the best, just by doing some things that I think, like, from an IQ standpoint, make a lot of sense. And kind of like teaching rebounding from a different perspective, almost like as an IQ thing, rather than just like a physicality thing. And so we were able to, was able to do that. I got promoted to assistant coach, and then was able to, then I was able to do recruiting and all the other stuff that I was able to do, and work with the offense and work with the defense. And, but through that experience, I was able to understand what it took to like run a program in its totality. And I think, like, a lot of times, like, I don't begrudge anybody who's on the fast track. Like, there's some guys out there that are phenomenal players, and then they get, maybe they get a year of an assistant, or they get a head coaching job really quickly. That wasn't my path. But at the same time, my advantage is now I know how to run a program. Like, I know what it is to be the guy who sweeps the floors. I know what it is to be the guy who runs the golf tournament and the kids camps. I know what it takes to do meals on the road and stuff like that. And then through that, like, basketball was always like the dessert. You know what I mean? Like, it was the thing that, like, I was so fired up to do. It was like, now it's like I get to run scouting reports. Like, that was like, some people like look down like, oh man, I got to do this scout. I'm like, this was like my Super Bowl, you know what I mean? Like, and so, I think I have an appreciation for like the totality of what it takes to win to run a college basketball program. When I got it to Oberlin, Coach Shiva Senthil was so great at, allowing me to even continue to do more, particularly like in-game coaching. I ran a lot of our offense. I ran our offense. I ran the huddles. I called out all the plays. Like, he really viewed me as like a co-head coach. And I'm really grateful for that, and I got to learn from him what it takes to run a successful Division III program. And I'm very proud of that too. Like, I think at Sac State, like I was a member of, the best team in school history. I was there for 11, 12 years. Like, we still had like, we still own the 5 best records in school history at Sacramento State. I've been at Oberlin for 4 years, and the past 3 years at Oberlin college basketball have been the 3 winningest years in the school's history. And they've been playing basketball since 1890. So,
Wow.
like it's just that stuff's been really, really fun. And, it's about like your journey is about like learning, understanding what you don't know, being around great people, learning from them, and then finding ways to make yourself valuable, and I think through that, like I've gotten to run offenses, I've gotten to run defenses, I've gotten to do rebounding, I've gotten to, run all the day-to-day stuff. And I felt like I was ready for this experience now. You know what I mean? I feel fully ready to run my own program because I went through those experiences.
Coach Gregory's giving me the time limit. So I'm going to put 4 questions in front of you real quick so that you can answer them. So going back to, I looked at the alumni for Mary Baldwin. I'm not very familiar with them at all, so I can't really put a question together for that one. But I'm a huge Dateline and ID channel kind of crime solving guy.
Okay.
Did Lester Holt ever come back and talk to you guys at Sac State at all? And then do you have to fight the battle of Mary Baldwin now being, co-ed now at all? And then how well does the Fighting Squirrels sell? And does that squirrel have a name?
Okay. I'll take these one at a time. So Lester, at Sac State, we had a couple of different, alums that, I think that have gone on to be really successful. I didn't get to meet them personally, but I know that Lester Holt's come back. Tom Hanks actually was like was at Sac State for a time as well. And so, there are some pretty good alums that I think have come back, into the mix, but I didn't get to meet them personally. Let me think here. What was the second one? I missed I'll do Fighting Squirrels. I'll do Squirrels real quick. So I think like I might be, I feel like I'm going to be like in a coaching trivia question one day, because the mascot at Oberlin, even though it's the Yeoman, our mascot was the albino squirrels. So now I'm the coach at 2 different institutions that have squirrels as their mascot, which is crazy to me. So yeah, they were at Oberlin. Our squirrel was Yobi, and it was our albino squirrel because of our albino squirrel population in Tappan Square. And now I'm the head coach of the Fighting Squirrels at Mary Baldwin. I don't know the mascot and if the mascot has a name or anything like that, but trust me, I'll be finding all of these intimate details out as this year goes along. And then I missed one. What was the one in the middle? What was the sandwich? You sandwiched me the questions, and I think I missed the middle one.
I wasn't sure if a lot of people don't Google things now, so they probably know this. But Mary Baldwin at one time was an all women's college, so I didn't know if you have to fight that battle at all, anymore or any longer.
No, I think like, and I think like right now I'm trying to learn, I'm obviously trying to learn the history, of the school. And I knew that it was an all women's institution. And I got to talk to first head men's basketball coach here too. And, he kind of talked to me a little bit about, how, he started the program, recruiting all the people that he recruited, how they kind of started as, the first year was just recruiting and stuff like that. And then they were able to, go into the Division III and then USA South. So it's a very new program on the men's side, but that's exciting though, too. And I think to have this opportunity at an institution that is a historic institution, but also is very new with the men's sports, I think provides a unique opportunity for our men's basketball players. You come in here as we were talking about high school kids, you could come in here as a college freshman and you could come in here and be the best 4-year player in program history real quick, right? Because there's not many of them, but I think that's a special and unique opportunity for some kids that want to be a part of something and grow something special. And, a really historic season here where they were able to win the USA South and go to the NCAA tournament. So they've had some success, but you could be part of a group that is the first group of Mary Baldwin men's basketball that sustains that success, we could have the best record in school history or, things like that. And one of the things that's awesome about, I think small college basketball, in general and men's sports being new is that it does get support on campus, when, you're kind of the thing to do in a lot of ways, right? If there's athletes and general students, they're coming to games. When I was talking to Coach Griggs about when they played Greensboro in the championship game, they hosted that game. And they said that the stands were packed and it was so packed that they had to put kids in in the room to the gym with a TV on so they could watch the game because they were, and I think how cool is that? You know what I mean? That you get to play in that kind of environment and I think that's what, that's the power of sports. It's how cool is that? That's what that's why we love it, right? You know what I mean? You get to compete, you get to play in front of some great people. You can play in some great atmospheres and you know what? If you got a chip on your shoulder and you work hard and you love the game, you can do some special things together. And I think that's just such a cool opportunity, and why I think, college basketball is so awesome.
Coach, I'm gonna turn this over to Gregory after I can get my personal comments out of the way. Listen, just by talking to you for the last hour, I can feel the vibe, I can feel the positivity rolling off of you. But I'm also going to put you at my table that I call the World Series of poker players. Okay, and the reason why I say that is we interviewed. I don't know if you know Tom Palumbo. He is now at Longwood College. He was at Guilford, the head coach at Guilford College. And about 2 years ago, we found out through the grapevine that he was getting, and Gregory and Devin will know who it is, and I can't remember the player's name by name right now, but he was a D1 player, if I'm not mistaken. Did he go to state, Gregory, or somewhere? And then he winds up back at Guilford, and they wind up winning the ODAC championship. But Palumbo sat there with his glasses on, you couldn't see his eyeballs, and then he never cracked until we said something about this player coming back. So when we did that, he was almost like, y'all weren't supposed to know that, So the reason why I say that is I think you know what you got at hand. And I think that you are not left with a cupboard, a bare cupboard, basically. And I think that you have the potential to be maybe not great, but really good this year. So yeah. I just want to, thank you for your time, basically, and let you know that I feel like any kid that winds up in that program is going to be well taken care of.
Hey, I really appreciate it. And honestly, it means a lot that you say that. I think that it really does. And really, one of the joys of this experience so far is to getting to meet, people like yourselves and stuff like that, and get to learn the area and getting to know you guys better and all the stuff that you do. And honestly, also, I think that, I've gotten to listen to your podcast a lot, and, what you guys do to grow the game is pretty special, and I think a lot of us, I try to do it, from a coaching standpoint, cause that's all I know. And that's what I'm good at. You know what I mean? I'm not good at much else, but, I think the stuff that you guys do on this platform to be able to grow the game and to be able to amplify voices in the Virginia area is something that's really, really special. And I'm really honored that you allowed me to be part of it.
Coach, just last one from me, just on the scheduling. Just and I'm pretty sure, or I guess the schedule for next year is pretty much set. I don't know if you guys do like a rotation or 2-year rotation or something like that. But as far as teams you might schedule in the future, I mean, I'm sure you can probably find a lot of opponents there in Virginia, as far as those other conferences we talked about. But is there any chance you might take the guys to Ohio or take them to California or something like that in the future?
Yeah, sure. I think that like one of the things that we tried to do at Oberlin was we wanted to give every guy like a home game, if we could, right? So like we had a lot of kids from Southern California. So we played Cal Lutheran in their tournament in Southern California and got to play them. We have a lot of guys from New York City, and so we went and played Sarah Lawrence last year. This upcoming season for Oberlin, they're going to go to, we plan on going to Chicago because we have some Chicago kids. So like, I think like, yeah, for sure. Like we want to be open-minded in terms of scheduling, especially if we have some guys that, that are from different areas so that we can give their families a little bit of like a home game. I always think that's really special. It was really cool when we played in like the Pittsburgh area at Oberlin. We had a kid from Pittsburgh and, we had a team dinner at his parents' house the night before. I always think that stuff is, we got to stay at the Gannon family house. It was so great. You know what I mean? Like that's the stuff that like, honestly, like, people will, I always tell guys this a lot too, like, points, assists, like all that stuff, like you're not going to remember that stuff like 30, 40 years from now. You know what I mean? But like you're going to remember eating a team dinner at the Gannon's house in Pittsburgh the night before we played Waynesburg. You know what I mean? Like you're going to remember that bus ride home from that 5-hour bus ride home after you have a big win. You know what I mean? Like you're going to remember, that's the stuff that you're going to remember. And I think like if you have some opportunities to enhance the student athlete experience, I think it's important that you take them. And so, yeah, we'll definitely look at some of that stuff in terms of schedule. And to be honest with you, the schedule part is hard. Like that's the thing that's that they don't tell you that. Like there's we're going to play some Division I opponents. Talk about Palumbo. I've been emailing them back and forth. Like we're gonna, we're trying to get on that schedule a little bit too, and stuff like that. And then I was talking with some guys to set up some scrimmages and trying to finalize that schedule. Can be kind of tricky, but yeah, in the future we'll be opportunistic and looking at ways. Honestly, it's ways. I always think about it. It's like, what ways can we enhance the student athlete experience? And one of the ways that you can enhance the student athlete experience is try to go and play in front of their families. And I always think that's a special thing.
Oh, Coach, one more from me as well. I mean, just so you can get back to your day, of course. But what's next for the team and yourself? Obviously, we're in the middle of the summer here. I mean, as far as recruiting, team activities, whatever it may be, what's next for the program?
I'm pretty fortunate that I feel like recruiting, like we've got ourselves into a spot recruiting where our roster's pretty well set. Big G made a good pitch though, so I think I'm thinking about opening up a spot. If he wants to play or any of his kin want to play and be a fighting squirrel. So, maybe he put a little bit more work on my plate these next couple of weeks. But yeah, I think the next part is to really invest in the guys that we have on our roster, work through some development plans for them, both for in the summer and the early fall, from a strength and conditioning standpoint and from a basketball standpoint. So like, I think trying to like bridge the gap of like, okay, so here's some things that I think that we can do from a strength and conditioning standpoint the next like 4 weeks to 8 weeks, right? Here's some things that I think that we can do from a basketball standpoint. And then also like there's, figure out things that like there's terminology stuff. There's all kinds of things that like, what I call, our early ups, they might call something else, right? So like there's all kinds of things that you can do. And right now it's really about investing in our current roster and trying to make them better. make them better during the summer part, trying to make them, and then once they get to campus, having them understand like what our schedule is going to be in the early fall for our 8 preseason practices, and kind of work through that part. So this is kind of where the fun begins in a lot of ways. Like once you have your roster and you get your schedule set and things like that, now it's complete and full investment into the guys that you have in the locker room, and how can I make these guys the best versions of themselves so that we can ultimately be the best Mary Baldwin basketball team that we possibly can.
Coach, I often don't agree with Big G, but I do agree with what he said earlier about you. I think it's been a great interview. I think Mary Baldwin made a great hire. We look forward to getting some games. I know you guys will schedule some games, close to us. And I went to Eastern Mennonite University, so I'm going to go there and catch a game if you guys play them as well. Take it easy on them, please. Okay. Take it easy on the Royals, please. But Coach, thank you enough for coming on and joining us for a little bit. It's been a great interview. I still have some more questions, so we'll have to have you on before the season starts again too.
Anytime, I would love it. I'm trying to, I want to get a moniker below my name. We got Czar co-host. So I'm trying to, maybe assistant to the co-host, something like that. If I can get on there, and then we would love to have you guys out to a game. I mean, between you three, I think like you guys could bring an atmosphere by yourself. So we'll get you in our gym, and that would be great. I would love that.
I think Devin had something to say. Devin, you have something to say?
No, I did have something to say. I just want to say, Coach set history here today. He made history today. The first time we've had somebody use the ODAC is the SEC before Big G, before he said it. So you definitely got on his good side there, Coach.
Yeah. Well, me and I feel like I have a kinship with Big G. We both go to the same barber.
Best barber, exactly. Best barber.
I'll be there with you guys soon, for sure.
Yeah,
That barber.
Gregory's looking for that one too. So,
Coach, it's been awesome, Coach. Coach Nate Smith there at Mary Baldwin University. Thank you, Coach.
Thanks a lot, guys. You guys have a great one. I really appreciate you having me on. Thanks for all that you do for athletics, in the Virginia area. Had a blast talking with you guys.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
We did too. Thank you.
Coach.